Hey everybody, I'm Joe Eisman. I'm the moderator of LTADchat. For those of you who are coming back to LTADchat, welcome back. For those of you who are new, a reminder that this is a forum where we share conversations about developing and implementing best practices in youth athletic development. Now, along the way, we've largely focused on physical preparation, so strength and conditioning type topics with a few other topics sprinkled in as well. And although we tend to keep ideas sport agnostic and have applications for both boys and girls, there are times when I really want to focus in on a specific topic, such as the female athlete. We have previously ran an episode on coaching the female athlete, and we're going to be recording a few other episodes as well that are specific to the female athlete for a nice series on the female athlete. And today is such an episode, and the focus today is going to be on nutrition or sports nutrition for the female athlete. And I'm happy to have Wendy Earlback with us to share her expertise. Wendy is a graduate of the University of Wisconsin Stout, where she has a master's degree in food and nutritional sciences, and she is also a registered dietitian. She's also a very sought after speaker on sports nutrition at the state, local, and national levels, speaking at a lot of different coaching conferences and sport nutrition conferences. She is also the queen of emojis on social media, and she offers really great content on social media. You can follow her on social media at Wendy_Earlback. Last name is Irlbeck. So again, social
B-E-C-K. Sorry.
Back, correct? Yeah. So again,
B-E-C-K. It's on the slide. That's okay, though. It's a
okay.
difficult name to pronounce. Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. And she also oversees her consulting company from nutritionwithwendy.com. Wendy, welcome to LTAD Chat.
Thank you so much for having me, Joe. I'm really grateful for the opportunity to be here and to contribute.
Yeah, super. So in a previous episode, I had Pratik Patel on, and he discussed some general sports nutrition. And we really focus on appropriate weight gain for teenage boys and more specifically football players, as this can really be an emphasis for football coaches during the off season. But today, I want to turn our attention to the youth and the teenage female athlete. And of course, there's going to be some similarities here related to general nutrition. But let's get your thoughts and recommendations on those basics. So can you describe to us what are the healthful dietary habits and practices for a youth or teenage female athlete that positively impacts not only their health, but their sports performance?
Well, that is a loaded question, so I look forward to answering it tenfold. I'll just start off. So I am a registered dietitian, nutritionist. I always encourage my athletes, again, to follow up with their physician, pharmacist, if they're taking any, medications, things like that. I always have that disclaimer because in practice, right, it is a multidisciplinary approach. So involving the sports med doc, right, the coaches, everybody. So that's what's really great about this, Joe. And thank you again so much for having me. Again, it's us all working together. So I hope that this information can be as basic and simple as possible. So that's why I have these great illustrations without content on the slides to talk about that. So let's just go ahead and dive into it. So first and foremost, this is one of my athletes in Indy. She is amazing, and we've worked really closely on, dialing in some of her habits. So she's going to serve as kind of the basis because she's like many young female athletes. When they come to me, they are very uncertain of what foods to eat, even their parents, their families, the coaches, uncertain, what time to eat the food, how much of the food to eat, and what quantities, what frequency. So as you know, and so do I, right? It can be complex. So if you're a coach listening to this, right, thinking in terms of the female athlete, right, what are the greatest risk factors? So that's where these illustrations come into play. So first off, calcium and vitamin D, we all know how important that is for our bone health, right? And we know that athletes playing soccer, football, volleyball, some of these other high risk hockey, they're at a greater risk for injury and illness, and that's greater stress on the bones. So we really want to focus in nutritionally on getting in good sources of calcium, vitamin D, right? Really, really important. So that's why I have down in the corner here some salmon, there's sardines, eggs, and then some dairy products as well. The reason why I talk about this is because it's recommended that young teen girls, 14 to 18, get in 3 servings of dairy per day. And typically, this population does not consume enough dairy. They typically tend to skip it, or they eat very little Greek yogurt, in my experience. And I know this because I have my athletes do food logs. We talk about, what their intake is like. I work with the family too. And there's a lot of misinformation out there, Joe, and I bet you can understand this too, that, dairy causes inflammation and it makes you gain weight. So for the female population, that increases their fear in eating it, when really we should be eating it, and it can help us. It can help us, decrease exercise-induced inflammation. It's good for heart health. It's good for building our bones. It contains protein, electrolytes. And another caveat to that is eggs as well. That's also one that has been so misunderstood, and it's probably going to continue for decades. So that's why it's so important for us to get out there and to talk about the research and how some of the data can be misunderstood, taken out of context. So again, with the female population, they're told all these things in the media, right? That these things are bad, they'll make you gain weight. So they tend to skip out on some of those really key fundamental foods that are so nutrient dense. So that's why I talk about that. We talk about basics. So how can we get in those 3 servings of dairy per day? Well, we can work on, first and foremost, breakfast, and that's also very important and often skipped. I advocate for breakfast, but all meals matter. So breakfast is very important, and this is strictly opinion based. You ask another performance dietitian, they may say differently. I don't think breakfast is the most important meal. I think all meals matter equally, right? It's about the basics and being consistent. But yes, breakfast does matter in the sense that it causes a huge impact on health and performance, because research, actually, it's a study carried out by Mahoney et al., 2005, illustrated that nutrients missed at breakfast are often not made up later in the day. So if you're a young female athlete, or athlete in general, right, that's pretty problematic if you're missing out on those key nutrients that can not only protect your immune system, you're in those critical stages for growing and developing your tissues, right? The Tanner stages. So kids are, females and males, are right under a lot of stress because it costs a lot of calories to grow and develop those tissues, not just your bones and muscles, but your brain. So that's why it's really, really important to get in, the dairy, the eggs, fish, a wide balanced, a wide variety of foods within the diet, to ensure that we meet all of our nutritional needs, so we don't have nutritional deficiencies, which often do occur in this population because of the fear, the misinformation, the lack of information. I think coaches are incredible. Sport coaches, strength coaches, health educators, they ask great questions, and many have really come forward, and I commend them for asking, I just don't understand it. Can you explain that to me? Because that gives us the opportunity to say, hey, if you have athletes in the weight room, ask them what they're eating for breakfast. Ask them about what their snacks are like. How can we get in those 3 servings of dairy? So I go back to breakfast. Let's do a Greek yogurt parfait, right? You're getting in protein, calcium, vitamin D. You're also getting in some carbohydrates, protein, electrolytes. It's really amazing. And then how about our snacks? A string cheese in between our meals with, maybe some color. I'm big on eating the rainbow, fruits and vegetables, the greater pigment, the greater nutrition. Just some of these basic fundamental habits. If you take away from, all the crazy misinformation and all the things, I really dislike, Joe, when people say, here's the list of do's and don'ts. I'd rather focus on here's the huge list of do's that we focus on. And a byproduct of doing the right things, right, is that all these other modalities will just typically improve, like our athletic performance, our recovery, right, our injury risk will, be greatly reduced. So thinking in terms of, again, just asking those questions instead of targeting your athlete like you're doing all these things wrong. Just ask them, how's your day going? And coaches do a great job of this, but then you can sneak in that opportunity for, asking about breakfast and nutrition. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with you, but I know for a lot of coaches, they're almost scared to talk about nutrition. So I empower them. It takes a village. So collectively, if we all work together with one unified message, we can help correct some of these deficiencies and reduce some of the misinformation that is circulating.
Yeah, that was a loaded question, wasn't it? A
Yeah,
lot to,
I hope I answered it.
there's a lot to cover there. What about any other specific micronutrients? Like you mentioned calcium and vitamin D, but are there other micronutrients that young female athletes may, want to be in tune with as well. And obviously you said if we eat a prudent diet, right? We eat the rainbow and whole foods basically, we shouldn't have to worry about this. But can we maybe target a few other micronutrients?
Yes, yes, absolutely, Joe. Phosphorus is one of them too. That's applicable to that slide. And then also looking at our B vitamins too. And I have this oatmeal bowl over here with bananas and chia seeds. Um, and a lot of athletes too will skip out on carbohydrates, right? Those whole grains and fear those calories or carbs because it's going to go to fat. So that's something too that when they cut out and they eliminate some of those major food groups like whole grains, you're missing out on some of those key B vitamins, which are really essential, right, for our macronutrient metabolism.
Yeah, and one thing, and I might have missed this as you gave us a load of information there, and I'm sure listeners are going to have to go back and watch that a few times because again, there is so many things that we need to pay attention to. But what about protein? Like when we talk with male athletes are always like protein, 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 right? But how about protein in the young female athlete?
Absolutely. So that brings me kind of to my next little slides over here to, or illustrations, if you will. So protein is great. And for those that work with me and that listen to me and follow me know that I advocate for higher protein, but context matters. So I think that, again, it's a loaded question. It depends. If we over consume in protein, we are so satiated that we are under consuming in carbohydrates then because we're so full. I would say though that a lot of young females will under eat animal protein. So that's why I kind of had this over here as well. And red meat was supposed to fly in on the slide, but animal proteins are something too that a lot of my young athletes will reduce, or they've heard that, protein's bad, it's going to make me fat, it's going to make me bulky, when, it's really that opportunity for education to say, no, that's not true. It's going to help with tissue repair. It's going to help keep you strong. You need greater protein right now because you are building up those tissues. And then on top of all the training, so if we want to support these training adaptations, we're going to have greater protein as well as greater carbohydrate needs. So that's where a dietitian working with a registered dietitian that understands how to appropriately calculate out, whether it's 5 to 7 grams per kilogram of carbohydrate, and then 1.2 to 2 grams per kilogram for protein. That's where nutrition gets really complex. And it is very time sensitive when you're working with young females that maybe are losing weight. You're seeing a drop in their performance. They're getting more fatigued. Maybe they're not eating enough protein. They're not eating enough carbohydrate. We know carbs drive muscle contraction, ATP production. So without sufficient carbohydrates, you're going to see a reduction in that muscle contraction, and the cognition is going to slow down. Everything is going to kind of diminish. So I also have this green juice over here because another thing with female athletes is juicing and the detoxes and smoothies that are full of sugar, and then you lose all the fiber, and then you lose that digestive process, which benefits gut health. But then it doesn't contain any protein. So then we have this significant, as I always use a roller coaster, this spike in insulin, and then our energy levels are just all over the place and they're up and down, where we want to maintain that steady, even keel. And that's what drives our focus, our performance, our energy. You talk about, student first, athlete second. If you don't have energy to perform, with your studies and in the classroom, depending upon what state you're in, or if you're working at home on your studies, we don't want this because that is going to make you moody, tired, fatigued. Again, it just diminishes mental health as well. That's a big part too, Joe, for a lot of female athletes is, and you know this as well, that image and looking a certain way, like I want to look like an athlete. And I say, let's just focus on eating like an athlete and you're going to look like an athlete. And how you look has nothing to do with how you perform, right? If you want to be faster, stronger, more explosive, and you want to outpace that runner, whoever, whatever sport it is, it doesn't matter about the body composition. Again, it's focusing on the fact that we need to eat these foods and these portions to support your performance. And a byproduct of that is that you'll have a very healthy body composition because you're an athlete.
That's a great segue into the next question. Because this topic of nutrition and young female athletes can be quite sensitive. It can be a
Mm-hmm.
sensitive topic in our culture, given societal pressures on body weight, physique, body image of young females, athlete or non-athlete.
Mhm.
But for now, let's kind of stick with young female athletes. And, what advice can you give to coaches who are listening when they discuss or share information on nutrition with their young female athletes?
Absolutely. I love that. So focusing on the athletes and creating a positive experience around their training. If they are coming to you and they're being open with you, coaches, and they're saying something like, I'm feeling tired, or you're noticing that they're not progressing, I think that warrants a conversation in referring out, to a female, because again, they're going to have that relatability factor if you don't have a female coach on staff. I can say this as a former college athlete, a former cross country runner. I was there. I lived that life. I can speak to that. I don't want the young athletes to make the mistakes that I made in under eating. It's miserable. If you're a good athlete, you can be great. You can be better. You don't have to feel miserable. In fact, it should be fun. If you don't enjoy training, you don't enjoy your sport, it's probably because we're not eating enough, right? And we're doing really high level training. There's so many athletes right now that are multi-sport. They're training at a high level, and they tend to forget that, it's all about having fun. So if you focus on the physique part of it, that becomes an eating disorder related thing. And then you have RADS. So referring out. And I do have a slide on that too, of knowing, when it is appropriate. If they're talking about body composition and they have this fear, if you can't bring in a female coach or a female athletic trainer, somebody on the team that can relate, because they'll feel more comfortable talking to them, bring in a dietitian. There's a ton of dietitians. If you actually go to the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, you can do a search for one in your area. So if you want to have them go, to one on site, or speak, virtually, you can go to the Academy's website and find one. I know several too. That if it's not me, someone else, I'm happy to refer out. I think I over answered that and probably then some.
Yeah. You kind of bled into that next question, which is, if a coach suspects disordered eating, what's the recommended protocol? So if I'm the high school basketball coach of the female team, of the women's team, and I might suspect disordered eating in one of my athletes,
Mhm.
what's the recommended protocol?
Absolutely. And I learned that when I was at the University of Florida, they had a protocol in place with screening when they had their incoming freshmen, when was your last period, weight history, your eating, your maybe like diets you've tried. There was a screening process that was put in place. And I assume every school, every sports med team that works with high school athletes, whether it be with the Mayo Clinic or if you have somebody on site full time, every school has a protocol, so that you can screen for those things. But if it's after the screening process and it's middle of the season, these are some questions, some signs and symptoms, with it not actually maybe being red S yet, but identifying that early on. Inadequate fueling can lead to reductions in strength loss. You get fatigued, delayed puberty, muscle loss. You can just notice your athletes are losing weight. Again, they're not responding to training. They're tired. They're slower. Maybe they're expressing, just some, um, I don't know, losses as far as the classroom too. They're missing, some exams. They're not turning work in. They just don't seem like themselves. They lost their pep. They're experiencing a lot of fatigue. What's hard about that right now, I just say this, Joe, is because we're in a pandemic, right? And the coronavirus is definitely reaping on our mental health. So it's really difficult right now. And I had this conversation with Dr. Andrew Jegum about discerning like what's what. So that's where it is important. Immediately refer to the doctor, get a therapist, counselor involved, psychologist, a sports med focused one if you can. There's tons of sports psychologists here actually in the state of Michigan. It's a multidisciplinary approach. So it's a full team that's involved with that. So getting, the athletic training staff, the doctor, mom and dad involved, everybody who can support that athlete, of course, and being very proactive about it. It's better to, bring that up than to have something happen that you can't account for later in life. I guess being more proactive versus reactive.
Yeah, good. Thanks for that response there. And probably coaches should be communicating with athletic directors and their athletic trainer
100%.
at minimum about establishing, protocol as well. Wendy, I want to return back up to some of the basics because, you talked about frequency, quantity, and when I was with Spartan Performance at Michigan State University, and we had a team of registered dietitians that worked with us, we always talked about eating the right amounts, the right types, and at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
And so you were talking about frequency, and I actually loved one thing that you said about breakfast. Like, we always give so much attention to breakfast, right? But you said that every meal or snack is important.
Mm-hmm.
But can you talk a little bit more about timing of intake, specifically, you know, around practice or competitions? And we called it the power hour, the hour before and the hour after, right? In terms
Yes.
of time, timing of intake, and maybe give some recommendations and tips for young female athletes and coaches of young female athletes, kind of related to timing of intake. And again,
Yeah.
especially around that time of, of training.
Yeah, and I have, can you still see my slide or
Yeah.
my screen? Perfect. So I gave a presentation to a volleyball team in Texas the other day, and I just wanted to pull up a slide, and then also just offer some recovery snacks, and then USOC resources are good.
Yeah.
So this is one thing that I tell my athletes. So sorry, let me just take a step back. So yes, all meals matter. There's no magic meal that's going to make you the best athlete or quicker, faster, stronger. It's being consistent. So you want to have balanced meals. So that goes first off, let's start with the plate and then we'll get into timing if that's okay.
Hmm.
Perfect. So this is what I use. This is one of the best. Now my computer's freezing. This is one of the best illustrations, in my opinion. The USOC, again, Team USA, this aesthetically pleasing training plate. This is easy weight management. So all meals matter, right? So every single meal should look like this. And I know breakfast, no one has all the time in the world. So that's why we talk about if you can at least grab a protein and carb of some sort, whether it be a Greek yogurt with some berries in it, right? So you're getting the protein, the carb. But ideally, in a perfect world, Joe, we would have every athlete eating 4 to 5 meals. And I say 4 to 5 because I even encourage a second breakfast. So 4 to 5 meals per day, looking like this plate where you have a whole grain, a protein, a fruit, and a vegetable. And then the size of those meals, right, will increase or decrease depending upon if it's a hard training day or not. So hard training day being 2 sessions, maybe you have conditioning and then also weights, you have practice and you have weights, or even, longer competitions. That's where the size, right, of the portion of whole grains would increase, along with even the frequency of those snacks too, because you need greater energy to support the energy that you've just expended. So that's why I always use these plates and I say, let's print this out and let's put this on your fridge. Let's get this in the locker room. Let's talk about this so that it's always in their face. And that's where, Joe, what's really amazing about these illustrations is that you don't have to think about like, grams, okay, I've got to convert, we have all these great recommendations as practitioners, but science to practice, like what's actually practical, like these kids, they're not going to learn that, right? So how can I say, all right, Johnny, you need to have a protein and it's got to be, at least 4 ounces. So it's the size of, a deck of cards. And, now that you're training more, or Susie, of course, we've got to have 2 of these, right? So thinking in terms of portions. And then I use stuff like this. So this is a Greek yogurt parfait container. So I say, let's fill this. This would be a great breakfast. Let's put Greek yogurt. Let's put some oats in there. Let's put some milk and berries. And then let's put up on the top here some additional walnuts. This is going to be a 600-calorie breakfast. And this is going to be awesome for your busy day. So thinking in terms of, we got to increase the frequency and the size, the portions, if you will, to support greater energy expended throughout, competitions and such. So this is my breakfast slide too, that has that study that I talked about. Of course, B vitamins and iron, we did mention that. But as far as timing then, so eating on a schedule, I talked about this too. I presented this in terms of bare bones for a female athlete. This is an eating structure. I don't have the times in there again because this can be inserted into, whoever's schedule, but this is really basic. And I would say most female athletes need to increase this. So a great place to start, right? You talk about practical application. If they're not even eating breakfast and they're skimping on lunch and not eating dinner, to give them this huge layout of food, that's going to be overwhelming. So let's just start here and say, let's try and get in, a breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And then let's talk about a pre-practice snack or after practice or training, I always tell my athletes within 30 minutes, consume 25 grams of protein and 50 grams of carbohydrates. And again, this is for females. If you talk about, males, it's different, but young female athletes, 25 grams of protein within 30 minutes with 50 grams of carbohydrates is going to help support that tissue repair, that recovery process, and expedite, that overall, performance adaptation the coach desires all in one.
Yeah, super. I like this last slide here as well. In some ways I like it, in some ways not, right? Because it gives them the recipe of what they should be doing, and they may look at that like, oh, I don't like egg bagel sandwich. So, but with the slide up there and kind of wrapping things up, you gave a lot of information today. And if I'm, you know, if I'm a sports coach or a strength and conditioning coach, what are 3 or 4 like really big nuggets that, hey, as you listened here over the last, 20, 30 minutes or whatever, these are 3 or 4, and it might be 5, Wendy, the big nuggets, right? Like these are things that you really should have gotten from sports nutrition for the young female athlete.
Excellent. All right. Let's go back. So rule number 1, eat breakfast and maybe eat a second breakfast. And then rule number 2, identify, the signs and symptoms in your athletes. If they're underfueling, please refer them out, right? Get the AD, get the sports med staff involved. Encourage all meals matter, right? Eat the rainbow, protein, fruit, vegetable. And then also making sure that they have something every 2 to 3 hours because you want to prevent that roller coaster, right? So there's that other nugget.
Yeah.
And then that timing factor of our post training, we want to have that 25 grams of protein paired with 50 grams of carbohydrates within 30 minutes. So 25, 50, 30 rule is what I've called it.
Yeah, excellent. Those are great tips right there. And you know what? I think I'd be remiss if I didn't let you talk a little bit about the importance of resistance training
Oh, yes.
and sleep
Yes. Yes.
for health and performance for the young female athlete.
Excellent. Sleep and weight resistance training is important. But I also just realized we can't talk about performance nutrition without hydration. I'm sorry. I've just got a
Yeah.
quick
Yeah.
address. This is really important too, right? Because it's so basic. Water is so undervalued. But if you have your athletes, right, again, ask them about how much water they're drinking. I don't have my hydro flask, but a lot of the most common concern too is that girls are coming to me and they're having headaches. They're not sleeping well. They can't focus. They're only drinking 1 bottle of water per day, so only 20 ounces, right? So we should be getting way more. So 60 to 80 ounces would be a good bare bones, because again, assessing hydration based on that urine chart, that's the easiest, most simple way for young athletes to determine their hydration, because if you don't, this is what happens. You get that fatigue, decreasing your performance, increases risk of injury. So really, really important. Sorry, I had to drop that in. I was like, we got to talk
Yeah.
about that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then resistance training and how important it is. Resistance training is so critical, and I advocate for females getting involved with the weight training because you can increase your lean mass, which has astronomical benefits beyond performance, right? For long-term health, you're growing and developing those tissues, right? You're fighting off future sarcopenia, that age-related muscle loss that can occur. And again, the more lean tissue you have, the better you are, right? It's such a great sport for women to get involved with too. Learning how to do things safely in the weight room, learning those fundamentals, that muscle memory as well. It supports cognition. It even helps your brain function as well too. Just focusing. It's different than your aerobic exercise. There's so many benefits to resistance training, ladies, and it's not going to make you big. It's not going to make you bulky. In fact, it will help your running. It will help your soccer, your volleyball, and everything in between.
Yeah. And then how about sleep? Again, we overlooked hydration, didn't we, with nutrition? But
Mhm.
in terms of even the benefits of nutrition on performance with resistance training and whatnot, like the importance that sleep has in the recovery process and with health and with performance, and coupled with eating a good diet, how that can really have the best impact on them.
Yes, I love that. So I don't have any of my sleep slides up, but go follow me on Twitter. I share these things all the time with illustrations. But
Mhm.
sleep at a minimum, the National Sleep Association, they have the guidelines posted. Female athletes or young females, athlete or not, you need anywhere at a minimum from 7 to 9 hours, ideally 7 to 10 hours of sleep, because that's where you have that plaque being, reduced and depleted out of your brain from all the stress. That's where the training adaptations occur. That's where you really experience all the benefits. Recovery really is a 24-hour process supporting, from nutrition, hydration, but then also rest and getting that good sleep and allowing your muscles to repair overnight. And that's just so important that, it's amazing how sleep, again, like you said, is overlooked, but it can create a huge concern for injury and illness. It can weaken your immune system. So avoiding your screens before bed, making sure that you're shutting down and unplugging from anything that's overly stimulating, an hour or 30 minutes before. And if you want to have a pre-sleep snack, you can do a little bit of cottage cheese, with a banana that's going to help support serotonin levels. You really want to prioritize sleep, ladies and coaches, and literally everyone that's listening to this, because it is so important. And that's where we repair and replenish and we're ready to go for the next day. And there's just so much research supporting those that sleep less than 6 hours and an increased risk of injury and illness.
Yeah, super. I didn't want you to get off of the show without being able to speak about this holistic approach, right? Because even though we wanted to focus on sports nutrition, this puzzle has to fit together, right? For optimal results. So I'm glad you were able to share, some thoughts. Yeah,
Yeah.
links, right?
Yes, so this is
Yeah.
like this just kind of ties it all together, because it's like you are only as strong as your weakest link. So if one of these right are off, it affects everything. And we know this from a posterior chain standpoint too. Coaches, that should speak to you, right? So we've got all things matter, right? It's all connected, and we've got to just make sure that we work on all these habits collectively. But back to the basics, like you said, Joe. So I'm so grateful that you invited me on to talk about some of these things, and I really appreciate it.
Yeah, super. This is a great slide to end with, no doubt. And Wendy, just as we kick off the show here, remind folks where they can learn more about you and reach you.
Absolutely. So you can go to my website, nutritionwithwendy.com. I'm very active on Twitter. My Twitter name is Wendy Earlbeck. And then my Instagram is Nutrition with Wendy. So reach out to me. I share a lot of information, but I also encourage you to follow other people as well. Erica, she does a great job too. And I think you're having her as a guest as well. She speaks to a lot of soccer athletes as well. So I like to highlight other dietitians, and, the ISSN, they share great infographics. Marie Spano, she's amazing too. I think that it's incredible to look at other resources as well.
Super. Again, Wendy, thanks for being on LTAD chat and sharing your expertise on this topic of sports nutrition for the young female athlete, but also, sprinkling in, the other links of the chain here as well. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Joe.